Premise 3. An all-loving, all-powerful God, if he existed, would remove evil and suffering. Conclusion. Therefore, God does not exist. This is an example of a deductive argument. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that it means that if the premises are true, then we have to accept the conclusion. However, the disadvantage is that it also means that if we can show that any one of the premises upon which the argument is based is not true, then we have invalidated the argument. Let's now look at each of the premises and judge whether they are open to question. Premise 1. Evil and suffering exists. Although this statement might seem obviously true, some thinkers claim that it is not correct to think of evil as a thing that actually exists. One train of thought suggests that evil is simply the absence of good. Darkness is the name we give to the absence of light. Darkness is not a thing in itself. Silence is the absence of sound. It is not a thing in itself. If evil is simply the absence of good, then it's not a thing in itself, so cannot be said to truly exist. Another train of thought, common in the Eastern religions, is that evil and suffering are human illusions. They are the names we give to situations when our own greedy and selfish motives are not satisfied. Premise 2. God, if he exists, is all-powerful and all-loving. Although theists such as Jews, Christians and Muslims would agree with this statement, there are many people who, despite believing in God, would disagree with this description of him. Deism is the belief in a non-personal God. This being would not have the characteristics of goodness or of being loving, since these are qualities only associated with persons. In Zoroastrianism, which has a dualist view of the universe, God is not seen as omnipotent, and therefore this could be a reason why he does not or cannot prevent evil. Premise 3. An all-good, all-powerful God would remove evil and suffering. This is perhaps the crux of the problem of evil. Most attempts to solve the problem of evil question this assumption that God would want to, or is able to, remove all suffering. Some argue that God does not want to remove suffering because he has legitimate reasons for allowing it to continue. Most commonly, that through suffering God can bring about some higher good. On the other hand, some argue that God simply cannot remove suffering, not because he is not all-powerful, but because it is logically impossible. In other words, trying to have a world with good but not evil is like trying to have a world with up but not down, or light but not dark. It simply is impossible. These attempts to explain why God chooses not to prevent evil and suffering are called theodicies.
Never say I didn't teach anything. So you have your philosophy and theology lesson for this morning. So from there, we're going to move into meditation or prayer. So I invite you now to move into that time, in that space. Each of us has our own way of entering that space. Some of you might sit up straight, have your feet flat, let your hands rest on your lap, let your eyes comfortably closed or resting. Take a deep, slow breath and embrace the silence between the words. Spirit of love, Spirit of life, we invite you into our hearts, into our souls, as we look deep within ourselves. Within us is the capacity for great good and great harm. We have, all of us, through our behavior in the world, expressed good and done harm. We have experienced heartwarming love from another person, and we've experienced heartbreaking hurt from another person. Knowing this, how will we nurture our hearts? Will we feed the hurt and resentment, letting it build to the point where it comes out sideways in our lives until it negatively affects our health? Or will we feed love, and forgiveness, even for those who don't deserve it, who have hurt us time and again, who have hurt those we love and care about. These choices seem to confront us almost daily. Deliberate or unnoticed, each choice affects our spirit, our heart, our behavior in the world. In this time and in this place, I offer you a moment to take a breath. I offer you breathing space, a moment to center yourself within yourself. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out.
When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love.
We have the capacity for good. We have the capacity to forgive. And we have the capacity to begin again in love. May the transformative power of love bring you peace, and may you carry that peace out into the world. Amen.
Here are some Unitarian Universalist views of evil.
From Reverend Paul Razor. Unitarian Universalists and other religious liberals have always emphasized the positive aspects of the divine and human nature. As a result, critics sometimes charge that liberals don't truly understand the reality of evil. For religious liberals, evil is not a supernatural force locked in a cosmic struggle against the forces of good. Liberals also do not worry much about the traditional theodicy problem, how evil can exist if God is both all-knowing and all-powerful. For liberals, evil is neither a demonic spirit nor a philosophical dilemma, but a reality to respond to and confront.
From Reverend Victoria Stafford. Sometimes I use a very subjective, almost subconscious barometer when reading the news of the day and deciding whether some action bears the weight of the word evil. It's not the magnitude of an event, nor the cold-heartedness of those involved, nor even the historical impact. It's the degree of heartbreak I feel, beyond sorrow or horror, a sense that something has been blasted apart, a shattering of hope, the collapse of what I thought or wished were true about the world and human nature. There are some truths, some news that break the heart, not permanently, but utterly for a while, as the realization forms, perhaps for the 1,000th time, this too is part of our humanity. Evil is the capacity within us and among us to break sacred bonds with our own souls, with one another, and with the holy. Further, it is the willingness to excuse or justify this damage, to deny it, or to call it virtue. The soil in which it flourishes is a rich compost of ignorance, arrogance, fear, and delusion, mostly self-delusion, all mingled with the sparkling dust of our original human being.
And from Reverend Judith Mayer, what is evil? An aspect of human nature. Apply enough pressure on any of us, and something ugly will surface. Evil isn't some malevolent power floating around the universe waiting to penetrate some unsuspecting soul. We do it all by ourselves. To acknowledge evil is to see something we don't want to see. We all cultivate an idealized view of ourselves. Self-knowledge takes hard work. Overcoming evil begins with being honest. Reckoning with evil is more than an eternal struggle, though. Evil surfaces in the cycles of violence we perpetrate as a society, often out of a misguided sense of necessity. It is a studied ignorance that keeps us from examining ourselves, but also from looking critically at the institutions that we create. The power to overcome evil has as much to do with overcoming our numbness and our helplessness about what is wrong in our world as it does from mastering our own impulses. Whether humanity will ever be free of the cycle of violence, we cannot say. But the change begins only when we are willing to learn the truth and dedicate that fearful knowledge to the struggle.
The Reverend Abhi Jamamachi says, I see evil as the willful separation from and lack of concern for the common good. Evil occurs when the capacity for empathy exists and is ignored, when better alternatives for being in right relationship are ignored, when we fail to act on the imperative to correct the discrepancy between what is and what ought to be, and when we resist our powerful impulses to be and do good. We are products of our evolutionary heritage and our cultural history. We might transform evil if we recognize our own complicity in the processes which engender and sustain it. We will overcome evil when we refuse to play the game or to be silent, when we make a determined effort to understand evil as a possibility that awaits transformation. Then we might inhabit a safer, more peaceful, and more just world.
As Unitarian Universalists, we don't often talk much about evil, if at all. And yet, it's in one of our sources. We affirm and promote the words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with compassion, with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Perhaps we don't talk much about evil because of our Universalist forebears who didn't believe in hell or the devil. Or perhaps we don't talk much about evil because of our Unitarian forebears who believed we could overcome even our most base instincts. Perhaps we don't talk about evil because of our humanistic forebears who found this term a little too related to supernaturalism. But friends, if we get tripped up, even in examining the word evil, how on earth, as a denomination or as a congregation, are we going to confront powers and structures of evil? As you know, we are a pluralistic congregation, many beliefs here. Each of us has a different understanding of what this term evil is and how to confront it. How to confront it within ourselves and how to confront it in the greater world. As you heard in the readings, not only us, but Unitarian Universalist ministers don't have any kind of unified understanding of what evil is. But just as we say we don't have to think alike to love alike, we don't have to be unified totally in our understanding of evil. If we explore the term evil in our society, we turn to many places. I turned to the dictionary, but it wasn't of any help. It had language like morally reprehensible, sinful, wicked, arising from actual or imputed bad character or conduct, causing discomfort or repulsion, offensive, disagreeable, causing harm, or my personal favorite, marked by misfortune. Not exactly sure what that means. I think part and parcel to our understanding of what evil is an understanding of why something is evil. What makes something, a person, an act, a power structure, evil? And I don't think we can say, oh, that word means nothing to me. Because it still exists. The word exists not only in our culture, but in our very sources. You know, I didn't know what the word guddle was. It didn't mean anything until I looked it up. And yet the word still existed. It means, by the way, fishing with your hands, groping under stones or banks of streams. Not a term I would use regularly. But as Unitarian Universalists, we don't use the term evil very often either. But I think it's important. So I'm going to suggest a few things. I'm going to suggest that as we think about evil today, that we have some common definition to hold on to, and that way we can explore a few ideas about it. First, I think for this definition, for our discussion here today, we're going to use a definition of evil that does not include the devil, demons, or supernatural intervention. As Patrick O'Neill in the Unitarian Universalist World, a magazine we put out, said, we Unitarian Universalists do not have the easy solution of theology that blames all evil on the workings of some devil. But many of us have witnessed unspeakable human acts that could be described as evil. In Auschwitz, in Cambodia, in Dresden, in Rwanda, and the barbarity of biological germ warfare. As I think about these atrocities, my first response is emotional. Anger, fear. Anger at what was done, and fear at the kind of violence that someone might be capable of doing to me or someone that I love. Given what we know people are capable of, horrible things that they can be capable of, I'd like us to start with a consideration of this definition of evil. Intentional harm done against person or persons, animal or animals, or planet. Harm done by one person to one or more creations, either directly or sideways. And what do I mean by sideways? Sideways has to do with the fact that we all have within us the potential to do great harm. Harm that has its roots in things that are inside of us. Unresolved hurt, guilt, resentment, pain. Issues that we struggle with, that cause us to be somewhat filled with emotion. It's like we are a tea kettle on a burner, and there's this pain bubbling up within us. And as we know, eventually the pressure builds until it spews out somewhere, often hurting an unintended victim. In other words, the pain comes out sideways, perhaps to someone we love or care about, that has nothing to do with where that pain bubbled up from inside of ourselves. So we're going to consider this definition and how our potential for evil can affect all of us. So let's come back to confronting powers and structures of evil. Let's say you believe that there are evil people out there doing evil things. I'm not talking demon-possessed, but you think there are people out there who lack empathy, lack compassion, are only interested in making money or gaining power. Perhaps there are leaders in our country or corporations or at certain neighborhoods or with certain spiritual beliefs that you believe are evil. Now, how does your personal understanding of evil affect how you perceive and how you choose to interact with those people? Do you perceive them as the other? An object or thing that has nothing in common with you? Thinking of them as objects gives us some freedom. Objects can't be hurt. Objects can't be wounded. Things don't have feelings. It becomes easy to harm them without feeling guilt, speak ill of them without regret, ignore their needs, feelings, opinions without a second thought. We certainly see how other people do this all the time. And when we see this, we get angry. When we hear people say things that show how they treat others as objects, when we hear Muslims are terrorists, or gay and lesbian have an agenda to convert my children, or blacks are abusing the Social Security system, we hear the intentional harm and irrationality, the evil in those statements. And they exist in our world, and those kinds of feelings exist. Those kinds of thoughts pop up in all of us. In the words we heard from Reverend Stafford earlier, beyond sorrow or horror, a sense that something has been blasted apart, a shattering of hope, the collapse of what I thought or wished were true about the world and human nature. There are some truths that break my heart, not permanently, but utterly for a while, as the realization forms, perhaps for the 1000th time, this too is part of our humanity. Yes, this too is part of who we are. We have that inside of all of us. And just because we are not committing unspeakable acts doesn't mean we don't have the capacity to do it. I think that's the hard concept for Unitarian Universalists to come to terms with. But my friends, we are not fluffy bunnies of eternal sweetness and light, nor are any Unitarian Universalists. We are humans, capable of intentional and sideways harm like any human being, even like the worst of human beings, the serial rapists, the murderers, the people we say are evildoers, because we too are all human. Let me share something that Reverend Erica Walker Wickstrom said. The problem of evil, as I see it, is that we are so readily tempted to imagine that it's out there somewhere, separated from us, that it belongs to them and not us, and that I believe, is ultimately the root and the design of evil. To make us categorize the world into us and them rather than recognizing our common kinship. The core of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and the core of all faiths that I know of, points to the truth that we are all part of a family that includes all creation, the interdependent web of all existence. So I believe that a working definition of evil could be whatever distracts us from our essential relatedness to each other, animals, to the earth. She goes on to quote Carl Jung, psychoanalyst. He writes, "The individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil has need, first and foremost, of self-knowledge, that is, and the utmost possible knowledge of his or her or their ultimate wholeness. He or she or they must know relentlessly how much good he or she or they can do and what crimes or harm he or she or they are capable of. And we must be aware of reading the one as real and the other as illusion. Both are bound to come to light from inside all of us. If we are to live for the good, we can only do it without self-deception and self-delusion. And so I believe we have to affirm what Alexander Solzhenitsyn says. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And if we accept that premise, the two things we have to do are manage the potential for harm to others within ourselves and show love and compassion to those who have done harm, even those who've harmed us, especially those who have harmed us. In other words, we think globally and act locally on evil. Are we willing to choose the hard route of showing compassion and transformative power of love not only to ourselves, to those we love, to those we know who have the capacity to change, but also those who continue to do harm, who have committed terrible atrocities, to those we call evil? Are we able to affirm the possibility in evil behavior? The possibility in evil behavior, rather than the pathology and ill intent of others. This is not easy. No one said Unitarian Universalism was easy. And yes, even as I say, giving compassion to others, especially those who cause harm, yes, you have to set boundaries to protect yourself from harm. Yes, you can't forget the behaviors that have harmed you or someone you care about. But we can set healthy boundaries. We can be informed by our experience and still have empathy and recognize our own complicity in the process which engenders and sustains evil. We can still open our hearts to those in need, both abuse victim and abuser. So let me tell you a story from my life. About 15 years ago, the Pasadena Police Department, Pasadena, Texas, I don't know, some of you all know what that place, asked me to provide group therapy for men who have been arrested for domestic violence. All of them had committed violence, mostly to their spouses. The police department owned a small, run-down strip center just off downtown Pasadena. Those of us who lived around Pasadena used to call it Stinkadena because, well, it smelled bad with all the factories and stuff. Probably wasn't important to put that in the sermon. I went by the strip center before the group began just to get my bearings. This was not a safe place. wheelless cars in the front yards, lawns unmowed, rough-looking people hanging around small barbecue pits, drinking beer, and watching me as I drove through the neighborhood. This is all just blocks away from this all but abandoned strip mall. So not only was I uneasy about being with the violent men, I was scared of the neighborhood, and the group was going to be at night. And I was going to be the only one there with all these violent men in this place. So, as I often do, I stopped for a moment to check in with myself before attending the first meeting. And I have to say that I felt fear and anger. And it really didn't come from the neighborhood or the darkness or the strip center. It came from my belief that I thought these men were evil. I believed that they had intentionally harmed someone they loved to gain power and control. And I felt that my job was to go in, meet these evil people, and try to make them good. Now, if you haven't seen the flaw in the logic there, we need to talk a little bit more. These men, even though I felt that within, these men were not pure evil. Like all of us, they had the potential for harm within themselves, and it had come out sideways at someone they love. Most of them didn't have a support system, didn't have the skills to manage their emotions, didn't have the verbal skills to talk about their feelings, or to discuss anything in a civil way, especially difficult issues. And I have to say, to a one, they all said they regretted their behavior. They kept trying to stop being violent and kept slipping time and time and time again. As I met with these people, I came to believe that they were honest with me about this. I couldn't see any reason why they wouldn't be honest with me. I wasn't there to judge them. And they were honest with each other. No one else in this group could judge them because they were all there for the same reason. I was there to help them, and they were there to help each other. Over time, I overcame my prejudice, my fear, my anger. I came to see them as flawed. And so I showed them compassion, offered them unconditional love, and they did transform. They did change. They were able to manage the evil impulses in them and actualize the good within them. I followed up with some of them after their court-required treatment with me, and in fact, many of them were doing well. They had not had any episodes of violence and were having a better relationship with their family. That experience, and countless others since then, have taught me to make a determined effort to understand evil as a possibility that waits for transformation. These really are more than just words to me now, as I have seen them happen again and again and again. Evil is not a thing, but an aspect of all of us. The potential within all of us to do harm, to cause suffering, to react without thinking of the consequences. And evil is the part of ourselves and others that awaits transformation, that awaits confrontation with compassion and the transforming power of love. My friends, let us not forget, ever forget, evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his or her or their own heart? Namaste.
From Rebecca Parker. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude to search for the sources of power and grace. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility, waiting. Their offering for this church community will now be taken and gratefully received.
And now it is time for us to extinguish the chalice, but let it carry its flame in our hearts. Let us remember our third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. I hope you think on that as we leave this time together. I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let us sing together hymn number 1012 in the teal hymnal, When I Am Frightened. The words will be projected to your left. My friends, we are all called to make a determined effort to understand evil. And I hope we understand it as a possibility that awaits transformation. Then we might inhabit a safer, more peaceful, and a more just world. Now, I invite you to turn around and greet those around you, especially those you don't know. Let us share the love of this community.